Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. Today's case that we're talking about is toxic. We all know, like, when somebody can get controlling or possessive or just, gross. Sorry, that's probably not the good word, but you know what I'm talking about. That it can get dangerous really quickly. Not only the dynamic within a relationship, but sometimes innocent people can get dragged into that as well, and it can be equally dangerous for them. And that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about a toxic situation that became very dangerous, and it's going to leave your jaw on the floor. So I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to get right into it. Stanley Sessions was living the dream in 2020. Now, he actually went by Scott. That was his nickname. And let me describe him. He was a tall guy with salt and pepper hair, a goatee. He wore glasses. He had a pretty average build with a little gap between his front teeth, and it kind of made him stand out, but in a different, good way. During the day, he owned his own painting business. He was serving the community of Greenlee, Colorado. During the night, though, he was like a complete different person. He was a star. He was a professional musician. Music was his absolute, hands-down, biggest passion. He once even told his dad that he was only happy when he was performing, and he spent the majority of his 54 years of life involved in music in some type of way. I'm talking all the way from junior high up until he was a full-grown adult. Now, Scott was a blues musician, and he was especially good on the trumpet. He was good enough to be a part of multiple different bands, including one called the Movers and the Shakers.
Well, I got to tell you, she's happy before she said hello. Yes, she is. Come on, Ryan.
So by 2020, he had been with the Movers and the Shakers for a few years, and he loved the spotlight. When he wasn't playing or singing, he was dancing to the music, and he was like hyping up the crowd. And basically, it didn't matter what he was supposed to be doing. Scott just like lit up the stage, and he was a fan favorite. He liked to wear this sequin red jacket while he was playing. It kind of helped him stand out, and it gave the whole show, a little bit of sparkle, literally. And the Movers and Shakers were popular. They got booked for a whole bunch of concerts. However, Scott was also playing in part of a band called George Gray and the Elvis Experience, which, as I'm sure you can imagine by the name of it, was an Elvis cover band. So he was busy. He had George Gray and the Elvis Experience gigs. He had the Mover and Shaker gigs. And each time he stepped on stage, he was just like bringing the energy, full force. He was singing, he was dancing. He even improvised and changed up the songs just to mix things up and make each show unique. He just had a natural skill with music. And according to one friend, Scott could hear a song playing and know exactly what key it was in, just by hearing it once. Which, I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with music, but I know enough to know that it isn't easy to just hear a song and be able to tell specific details like that. But Scott had a gift. And Scott's musical talent didn't come out of nowhere. His biological father was also a musician. Scott's mom was a very young Mormon woman when she got pregnant, and his father left her to just deal with it all on her own. Now, this was in the 1960s, and a lot of people disapproved of single mothers. And it was even more harsh, as I'm sure you can imagine, in the Mormon church, and in her family in particular. Scott's mom knew that she could not provide a good life for him. So after she gave birth on March 25th, 1966, she put him up for adoption. And that's when he was adopted by Stanley and Linda Sessions, who were just absolutely delighted and overjoyed to welcome their first child into the family. The adoption was open, so years later, Scott looked into meeting his biological family, and he found his mother, and he was happy to learn that he also had a half-sister who was born 5 years after him. Their mother even put the two of them in touch with one another. Now, it sounds weird, but it was almost like these siblings had a psychic connection. Scott's sister Allison had always felt like she had a brother, even before her parents had told her that Scott existed. There was just something in her gut that told her that there was a brother out there. So it was almost like Allison had been missing Scott her entire life, even before she knew about him. Then, one day, she got this call from, a complete stranger saying, "Hey, sis, hey, it's me, I'm your brother." And Allison said that she felt an instant connection. The two of them texted, they called, and it was the most natural thing in the world. They just clicked on this very deep level. Now, Scott had another adopted brother named Steve, and through him, he had two nephews that he was very close with. He also had a little cat that he just was absolutely adored. Its name was Munchkin, and this cat was like Scott's baby. He'd even been known to leave a party early because he had to go home and take care of his cat. So between his jobs, his family, his huge group of friends, his cat, he had a pretty fulfilling life. But he was missing something, a girlfriend. Not that Scott had never dated or been in a relationship before. It was actually basically the opposite that was true, because Scott dated around quite a bit, and each time he found a woman and got a little bit serious with her, drama would start. Now, if I was going to be polite, I would say that Scott was passionate. He was a musical artist who felt with his feelings, and he always cranked up his feelings to an 11. But if I was going to be less polite, which we know I am, at least two of Scott's girlfriends said that he was jealous. He was angry. It wasn't just this tortured, passionate musician. And apparently when he got mad enough, he could be violent. It was bad enough that both of those girlfriends eventually broke up with him, but not before having to call the police many times because of Scott's temper, because his temper would just get to this scary, dangerous level. So much so that he was arrested for domestic violence in 2018 after he threw a cup of coffee at his then-girlfriend Loretta. The cup missed her, thank God, but still. So she got a temporary restraining order against him and dumped his violent ass. And you might think that that was the end of Scott and Loretta. But after things settled, the two of them actually became incredibly close friends. His other ex-girlfriend also stayed friends with Scott after they broke up, which I think it's kind of incredible to me, because it's one thing to stay friends with your ex. I mean, if you're close enough to date, you're probably close enough to be in a friend in a platonic way. But once you start adding violence into the mix, I can't imagine anyone wanting to keep somebody like that in your life. And I guess Scott, though, had to have just been one of those guys who was easy to get along with when you weren't actually dating him, that maybe there wasn't some sort of toxicity in a friendship level. Because Loretta and the other ex didn't see his temper as a deal breaker so far as friendship was concerned. But that made a certain amount of sense too, because Scott was very warm and just good with people. Again, the people that he wasn't actually dating. He was one of those people who never ever forgot somebody's name, even if he had only heard it once. He also remembered little details about other people's lives. Like if you mentioned that you had a dog, he would ask how the dog was doing every single time he saw you or talked to you. You would say that you like gardening. He would ask how the flowers are looking this year. He was just one of those people who really listened to what you had to say. He remembered personal details, and he made the people around him feel special and seen. And this was especially impressive when you think about how many different people he met. His different bands had him traveling to different shows all over the country. He was meeting so many people. And on January 22nd, 2020, Scott was performing at a blues jam concert when he met Heather Frank. Now, Heather was a gorgeous 48-year-old woman who looked way younger than her age. She was a mother to 3 boys, all of whom were in their 20s, and she worked as a server at Doug's Day Diner in Loveland. So this was about 30 minutes away from Greenlee. She had recently gone from dark brown hair back to her natural blonde, and it really lit up her face and kind of gave her this glow. She was very bubbly, very friendly, which was great for her because she was a waitress. So she always seemed friendly and approachable and happy. And she also had some success in her previous job as an assistant bank manager. But if you really want to get a sense of what kind of person Heather was, you just have to look at her relationship with her oldest son, Alex, because the two of them were best friends and spent so much time together. She made an impact on all of his friends. Everyone who met Heather noticed just how nice she was, how well she dressed, how beautiful her outside matched her equally beautiful inside. She was just, as cliche as it sounds, a light. Now, Heather grew up in Wisconsin, and she was a die-hard Green Bay Packers fan for life. She loved to crack open a cold beer, watch her Packers play. She also liked doing crafts, sewing, cooking. She loved camping, loved the outdoors, and she loved going out and enjoying live music, which is how she met Scott. The two connected for the very first time at that concert, and they talked for a little bit before then becoming Facebook friends. Now, it seemed like Heather and Scott were hitting it off. They went on a few dates, and the entire time they just kept messaging each other back and forth. They were keeping things casual, not wanting to jump into anything too serious right away, but based on the way that they were talking to each other, it sounds like Heather and Scott were both open to taking things to the next level, especially if everything kept going well between the two of them. But then on February 10th, Scott's friends and family started growing concerned when Scott missed a sold-out show where he was supposed to be performing. It was completely unlike Scott. I mean, he lived for his music. He never missed a show. In fact, he was almost always early to those kinds of gigs. But Scott's bandmates thought that maybe he had a bad day, maybe he overslept, maybe something just pulled him away. So they called him, but Scott didn't answer. Then they reached out to his dad, Stan, but he said he hadn't spoken to Scott since the Saturday before, February 8th. And apparently during that phone call, Scott had told his dad that he made it home safely from one of his trips and that he was going out on a date that night. Stan didn't know if he actually made it out on that date, but Scott never showed up to the performance on the 10th. And then early the next morning, some friends went to check and see his apartment and see if he was there and if he was okay, but they noticed that his car was gone and that his cat hadn't been fed. Now that was not at all like Scott, because remember, he adored his little cat Munchkin and treated him like his own baby. So something was wrong, and Stan reported him missing that morning. Now this was a Monday, and on that same day, apparently a snowplow driver was clearing a remote road in the Colorado Rockies near Pooter Canyon, making sure that the paths were clear in Rocky Mountain National Park. There had been a big snowstorm the night before, so now it was important for the snowplow driver to get, everything off of the road, get it cleared, make sure that the roads were safe. So he was hard at work when he noticed that there was a log on fire. Definitely weird and unexpected, and it was right there out in the open after a snowstorm on this mountain road. So he pulled over to put this fire out. But that's when he noticed that there was something right next to this log. It was a man's body. Now, it's a miracle that the body was found when it was, because the area was extremely remote, just a dirt road in this isolated area up this steep hill in the Rocky Mountains, It would have actually been very easy for a body to have stayed there undiscovered until there was nothing but bones left. So the snowplow driver called the police, who really needed no time at all to conclude that this man had been murdered. I mean, it seemed obvious. The remains were wrapped in a plastic sheet with duct tape holding everything together. His head had also been wrapped and taped. Now, from what they could tell, the log had been set on fire because the murderer had been trying to destroy the evidence by burning the body. But, and I know I've mentioned this before, you need a fire to really get really, really hot to burn an entire human body. And this little log wasn't cutting it. Now, even though the man had some scars from the burns, he was in good enough condition to be identified. The police could even still see a big open wound on his neck, which they figured was likely what killed him. So they took this man's fingerprints, and they learned that it was Scott. So that very same night, his father, Stan, got the news that his son was dead. Stan was devastated, but it hurt even worse because he had to tell his sick wife, Linda, about the death, which she asked him, and I quote, "Who would want to hurt my Scotty?" Which is just so incredibly heartbreaking. I mean, it's never a good thing for a parent to have to learn that their child is dead, but Stan and Linda were also both in their 80s. They weren't in great health, and now like this blow, I don't know how you deal with news like that. Now, as for the police, they were focused on answering Linda's question. Who would want to hurt Scott? Who would have the motive? Given the cause of death, it was pretty clear that the murderer had been very angry. I mean, it seemed like a crime that must have been committed in a full-on rage. His autopsy showed that he had nearly been decapitated. His spinal cord was severed from some sort of cut or slash to the back of his neck, and his throat had also been slit. So when the police searched Scott's home, they were looking for anything they could find, and they found his beloved trumpet just safely put away in a closet. However, when they started looking for his car and his cell phone, they couldn't find them. So because of that, it seemed like he must have not bumped into whoever killed him until he was well out of the house, having his car and having his cell phone with him. So the police officers questioned everyone who knew Scott, trying to see if they might give them any more leads. They started with Scott's parents, Stan and Linda, and then when they didn't have anything useful to share, the officers moved on to Scott's close friends. Then more of their casual acquaintances, kind of just making their way down the list from the people who were the closest to him all the way down to the people who were more distant. But given how popular and outgoing Scott was, the list of people to question was long. It was going to take a while. However, there was one person that they weren't questioning yet, because apparently the police didn't know that Scott was dating Heather yet, so it didn't even occur to them that they should interrogate her. Yet. The police were also able to access his phone records, which this showed the area that he had last been in, which was about 3 miles away. When the police were searching that area after getting the cell phone records, that's when they found Scott's car. It was parked in a nearby King Soopers, which is a supermarket chain, if you're not familiar. The key in this car was still inside the ignition, and one of the floor mats was outside on the ground. So next, of course, the investigators started combing through the security camera footage from this King Soopers parking lot. They watched hours and hours of tape before they ultimately found what they were looking for. Someone had driven Scott's car to the store lot on February 11th. The camera showed him parking, then getting out and walking away. It was a residential area close to other businesses, so somebody walking around wouldn't have stuck out. But of course, the footage was grainy and it was hard to see. So the police couldn't determine the driver's identity. They were pretty confident that it was a man, but who? And since this was found from the day after Scott's body was found, it was obvious that it wasn't Scott who drove out there and parked. It had to be the killer. Now, the parking lot wasn't too far from where Loretta lived, which you'll remember Loretta was Scott's ex, and they had a very dramatic, somewhat violent history and relationship. And the investigators knew that because the police report and restraining orders were all still on file. So they pulled in Loretta for an interrogation. However, she said that she had been homesick the entire time that Scott was missing on Monday and Tuesday. She hadn't even left the house. She also hadn't been online, so she didn't even know about Scott's murder until Wednesday the 12th. But now that she knew what had happened, she seemed genuinely upset. She just didn't come across like someone who had murdered her ex, or given that the police thought that the killer was a man, like somebody who had found some guy to go murder her ex for her. Still, they asked her about her and Scott's relationship and the violence. But Loretta kind of just shrugged it off, like the way that he had treated her was really no big deal. Which you might be thinking that that made her look more guilty, like she was trying to pretend that she didn't have a motive. But the truth was, Loretta apparently moved past the abuse pretty quickly, and pretty easily, way before Scott ever even went missing. One time, she even wrote a letter to a judge on Scott's behalf, asking for leniency, and to basically share that she thought that Scott was a good guy all in all. All to say, there didn't seem to be any motive for Loretta to want to hurt Scott. But finally, the police found something that was an absolute goldmine in terms of breaking the case wide open. Because apparently, Scott had written down all of the usernames and passwords for all of his online accounts. Literally, there was this piece of paper with every bit of information that the detectives needed so that they could see his emails, his social media, his online banking, everything. Which, I gotta say, I've heard of files like that, and I've actually seen something that's pretty funny on TikTok where it says, like, give this to Dateline if I ever go missing, and it's like a folder where you put all that stuff in, but I feel like that's kind of smart. Maybe not for people who are nosy, but I feel like that is kind of smart. So that's how they found out about his relationship with Heather. They didn't know about it before, but they did now because the two of them had been exchanging multiple messages. The tone was very flirty, very romantic, which you would of course expect from two people who just started dating. However, the last time either of them spoke to each other was on February 8th, the same day that they had determined Scott disappeared. Heather had never reached out to him again after that, even though they had been talking constantly before. And remember, Scott's body wasn't found until the 10th. So there were 2 whole days where Heather shouldn't have had any way of knowing that he was dead or missing, yet she wasn't checking in, she wasn't flirting, she wasn't asking if he was okay. Nothing. Plus, the messages between Heather and Scott were pretty suspicious all on their own. Around 5 p.m. on the 8th, Heather invited Scott to come see her at the house. Scott told her that he needed to take a shower, but that he would head over that way when he was done, if that was, quote, groovy, in his words. And Heather just told him to hurry. Scott then asked if he should pick up beer on the way, and Heather said yes. Then the final messages between the two of them was from Heather, who sent him a very short message at 8 p.m. asking where he was. But after that, neither of them ever spoke again. But all through this last conversation between them, Scott sounded warm and nice and, calm and chill. He was sending smiley face emojis, using the word groovy, just being very sweet. Yet Heather's messages were brief and to the point. They had been flirting up until then. Before that, up until the 8th, both of them had always been gushing about each other, affectionate. But then in this final exchange, Heather was coming across as very stiff and almost like she didn't want to be so lovey-dovey with him. And let me just give you an example. In one of the messages, Scott told her to be ready because he smelled amazing, which, it's kind of the sort of thing you say to somebody to be cute or funny, and then they say something cute or funny back. But instead of flirting back or complimenting him or anything like that, or I can't wait, what cologne do you wear or anything like that, she was just kind of all business. She was just just get to my house. So that was the last time that Heather and Scott communicated. But then the next day on February 9th, Heather called her boss at Doug's Day Diner, something around 3 a.m. She said that she wasn't feeling well and that she wouldn't be coming into work. All of which was pretty suspicious. We're all thinking it, right? It almost sounded like Heather might have lured Scott to her house and then killed him, and then she skipped work to deal with the body. And this seemed even clearer when the police looked at Scott's cell phone records again, because they showed that Scott's phone went to Heather's house and stayed there all night. And Heather's house was also in that same area as the Super King's grocery store chain, the supermarket where Scott's car was eventually left. The phone eventually died or was turned off, though, at her house, and that's where the tracking stopped. So the police headed to Heather's house, and they saw even more weird stuff before they even had a chance to question her. See, they knew what kind of car Heather drove, but they were surprised to find a different car parked right in front of her house. It was a light-colored SUV, and the front end had been damaged. It was clear that it had recently gone through a snowstorm, too, because there was a ton of ice and snow stuck to the bottom of the car. The officer also noticed bright red mud splattered on the sides of it. And the police recognized that mud, because it was the exact same color as the mud in that road near where Scott's body was found. Now, the white SUV was registered to someone named Kevin Eastman, and Kevin was Heather's ex-boyfriend. Now, Heather had been struggling for the past 5 years to break free of this guy. After her divorce in 2010, Heather first got into her on and off again relationship with Kevin. Now, the two of them were toxic. When things were good, they were amazing, but when things got bad, it got violent. They lived together for a few years in Greenlee, and Kevin enjoyed spending time with her sons, being in this relationship, but they both had issues with drinking, and it really just brought out the worst in both of them. And I think it's safe to say Kevin was way worse. On multiple occasions, Heather confided in her friends that Kevin had physically hurt her. Once, she even told her hairdresser that Kevin had ripped out a chunk of her hair, and the hairdresser saw the bald spot on her head. Her friends saw her with bruises more than once, and she would always confide in them and tell them that they were from Kevin. And then in 2019, things hit a whole new level when Heather and Kevin got into an argument at a hotel in Denver. The fight escalated until Kevin punched and hit Heather so badly that she needed to go to the hospital. She reported it to the police and said that she was afraid of Kevin. She was afraid of him hurting her, begging him to stop, begging the police to do something about this. She was afraid that he was just going to get away with it, just like he always did, and that if he got away with it, something worse might happen. So the Denver police issued an arrest warrant. However, they didn't follow up on it, and they never actually bothered to arrest Kevin. Now, at some point, Heather kicked Kevin out of her apartment, and the timeline is a little fuzzy because the two of them had a very hard time permanently ending things, but Kevin would just tend to show up and stay over whenever he could get her to give him another chance. And that really fits the statistic that you hear a lot about how it takes an average of 7 times before a victim can permanently leave a dangerous partner. And in addition to the physical violence, Kevin also controlled Heather's life. He had to know where she was at all times, who she was talking to, where she was going, who she was with, everything. One time, a male friend gave Heather a ride home, only for Kevin to turn around and threaten him. He told this friend, "Stay away from my wife." That's what he called her, his wife. He said that he would stab the guy in the face if he ever did anything with Heather ever again. So all this guy had done was give her a ride home, but that was really all it took for Kevin to just fly into this complete rage and just fly off the handle. Kevin also proposed to Heather more than once and even rented out a chapel during a trip to Las Vegas. But Heather would always turn him down. She didn't want to spend her life with him, and she didn't want all of the legal complications that a marriage would bring to it, and a marriage that she knew would probably end with a divorce. She didn't want to tie herself to him even more. So finally, at the end of 2019, Heather told her kids that she was done with Kevin. She kicked him out for good, once and for all. And that is when she started dating Scott. Now, in the meantime, Kevin lost his job. For years, he had worked on oil rigs. He had also dabbled with welding, mechanical things. But then he found himself out of work and also out of Heather's home. And he couldn't afford to pay for his car or his phone. So he moved in with his sister in Parachute, which is about 4 hours away. He didn't want to leave Greenlee. He didn't want to move too far away from Heather, but he had no other options. So he and his sister lived together for a while, but she eventually also ended up changing the locks and kicking him out because he just wouldn't stop drinking. I can't even imagine how out of control he had to have been for his own sister to go to such drastic lengths. I mean, to change the locks on him. So anyway, Kevin was desperate. He needed somewhere to live, and he couldn't afford anything basically without a job. But then he managed to get a job with an old friend named Troy Bunnell. Troy owned his own trucking company, and he hired Kevin as sort of a maintenance man / all-around fixer. Kevin made $500 a week, which it wasn't a whole lot, but the good news was that Kevin didn't have to pay rent anywhere because Troy let him live on the property free of charge. So definitely not the worst setup. However, there was a catch. Kevin had to pretty much be available 24/7. He didn't get any days off. If Troy needed him to handle something, even if it was in the middle of the night and Kevin was dead asleep, the expectation was that he would get up and get to work. I mean, it wasn't ideal, but it got him back in Greenlee, and Kevin really didn't have any other options. So he accepted this kind of crappy job where he didn't have any time to himself, and he was making way less than he had made at any previous job before this time. I mean, Kevin had been making about 3 times as much as he was now, but it all felt worth it to him. Because by February of 2020, Kevin was back in Greenlee, and he was also trying to get back in Heather's life. But, as we know, she had moved on. She was with Scott now. So when the police got to Heather's house and Kevin's SUV was parked out front, it seemed like maybe she had taken him back and let him move in, which was interesting timing, to say the least. He was back right after Scott turned up dead. So the police got warrants to access Kevin's cell phone records. And they also put trackers on Heather and Kevin's cars. They even secretly installed a camera across the street on a utility pole. It was the best way to keep track of when they came, when they went, and what they were up to. And Kevin's phone records showed that he was at Heather's house the entire night of February 8th. That same night that Scott's phone was showing being there, and Scott was there. And Heather's phone was also there too. However, Kevin and Heather's phones didn't stay at the house. Instead, they went up to the canyon, right in that same area where Scott's body was found. The police even found a camera that had recorded Kevin's car going up and down the canyon around 8:45 in the morning on February 9th. And remember, that was the same day that Heather called in sick to work. She did go back in on Monday, but apparently when she did, she wasn't her normal, bright, happy self. Instead, she seemed upset, distracted. And her friends noticed, but whatever was bothering her, she just would not share. For the next few days, including the days when the police were doing surveillance on Heather and Kevin, they both went about their lives pretty normally. They went shopping, Heather got her hair done. Heather still seemed upset, at least to the people who knew her, but that could be explained away by the fact that Scott had been found dead. But then there was finally a change on February 15th. It was a Saturday, exactly 1 week after Scott had last been seen alive. Kevin and Heather were spotted on the surveillance camera outside of their house. The two of them walked outside, got into a van, and then drove away. It was hard to tell, but it seemed like Heather was a bit unsteady on her feet too. She wasn't falling over or anything, but she also wasn't walking in a straight line. Their car trackers showed that they were heading to Weld County, and they eventually ended up at Troy's property. Remember, Troy was Kevin's friend who gave him a job and that place to live. Now, it was dark by the time the police kind of drove by to check it out, and the officers couldn't really see what was going on. This was where Troy lived and also where his business was, so we're kind of talking about like this huge plot of land right out there in the country. There was just way too much land for the police to search everywhere, and I don't know this for sure, but I have to also assume that the police didn't want to spook Heather or Kevin. They didn't want them to realize that they were being tracked or watched. So because of that, because it was dark, because it was difficult, they sort of just dropped the search right there. But then early on the morning of February 16th, Kevin was on the move again. He left the house around 3 in the morning, and he made a couple of different stops. Now, for the police who were tracking his movements, they only had one explanation for why he was stopping at all these places at all hours of the night. He had to be disposing evidence, right? And one of the investigators drove near Troy's house and noticed a fire that was burning on the property. Before he could investigate further, he saw Kevin leave Troy's house again and then pull into a nearby gas station. He filled his car, then he started filling up a gas canister. Now, given that the police had already seen one fire near where Kevin was staying, they now thought that he was buying more gas to burn and destroy even more evidence. So rather than let him do that, they arrested him right there on the spot. When they brought him in for questioning, though, all Kevin could do was whine and complain about how tough his life was. He'd been living with his sister, but she had just kicked him out because of his drinking, even though he was supposed to be sober. He was going on and on about his relationship with Heather, which really, in all, was all the police cared about hearing about. That was what there was going to be motive, but take a listen.
A year ago, on Valentine's Day, the lady that I'd been with went through hell and back, treating each other bad and good, and Heather. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still love her with all my heart. And we're trying to work it out. Yeah, I don't know, my sister's totally against me, but anyway, so she broke my... Do you want this backstory?
Absolutely.
Okay, so she broke my heart really bad on Valentine's Day. I took her out to eat, and then I told her, hey, if we quit drinking, we can make this work. If you don't want to quit drinking, I can't stay sober, so let's just quit or I'm going to leave you. And she says, well, I'm not giving that up. And I was like, all right. And then she disappears for 3 days with an ex. And after that, it was just us trying to save up my money to move out. And it's just a downward spiral between us. And then, yeah, there's just lots of stuff that wasn't copacetic for a relationship, you know what I mean? Infidelity and stuff. And I've been faithful to her for like 4 years at that point. Before that, I'd been very abusive. We were abusive to each other, but I was physically abusive, and I know that was wrong. And I went to counseling and all of that. But so then anyway, I moved out in August, living on my own, and things were working really, really good between us, and I thought we were really going to make it. And then I got laid off, and then right before Christmas, she just gave me a call, and she said, hey, I don't ever want to see you or hear you again out of the blue. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense, and it like just totally destroyed me. I went off my medication, and I just gave up my will to live.
Why were you depressed? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, no, I don't, because Heather's just mad at me, you know, yeah.
Why?
I don't understand why she gets mad at me. Well, she's mad because I'm working for Troy. She doesn't think, her and Troy don't get along.
Okay.
And she thinks that, yeah, she just wants me there with her all the time in her mind, but then the reason I don't do it all the time and always have a backup is because at the drop of a hat, she'll get a call from an ex and she'll be like, hey, you need to leave. And it's like, oh, where am I gonna go? You know, I got all my ducks in this basket with you, babe.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
That's
so,
really got to be frustrating for you.
yeah, it was like a yo-yo. And that's what my sister said, don't you ever dare to go back to her. I couldn't even hardly speak a sentence without crying when I met her over there with my sisters in January. I was such an emotional wreck.
He tried to act like Heather was just as violent as he was. And he did this like fake regretful act, like he hated that he had hurt her, but what else was he supposed to do with how she had treated him? And I say the regret was fake because there was no evidence that Heather had ever hurt him. No one had ever seen him with bruises or any other injuries, and this is just my opinion, but it sounds to me like he was trying to blame Heather for his own horrible behavior and actions, and then pretending that he felt bad about it was all kind of like part of the act. But according to Kevin, he loved Heather so much that he kept coming back, no matter how much Heather hurt him. He said she cheated on him, kicked him out, but he just couldn't give up on her. He made her seem pretty cold and unfair to him, kicking him out or running away with exes, and in the meantime, he was wearing a wedding ring to show his devotion, even though he and Heather weren't even married, which I gotta just say, it's super creepy to me, but that's a whole other thing. And even though Heather had called him in December and said she never wanted to see him again, as soon as he could get back to Greenlee, he went to her house. He told the police that he never saw Scott, though, while he was there, but pay attention to what he said next.
And so you said, I want to kind of go back to the night that you saw Heather, and you said that she had a date.
Right.
Tell me more about that.
I've been on the road for 3 days and one pair of clothes. I was really hoping that it would have went different.
What would have went different?
That she would have let me come in and shower, and that it would have been like it used to be between us, you know?
Sure.
Because she's always a great, well, when she's not mad, she's a great nurturer. Yeah, and like she loves to cook and she loves to feed me.
You really
So,
care about her.
Yeah, I just asked her to marry me, you know what I mean? Again.
How many times have you asked her?
3, that's it, yeah. I asked her in 2014, the Pyramid Place in Vegas.
The Luxor?
Yeah, I rented the chapel, I rented the room, got us airfare for her birthday, all to surprise her. And we got down there, and she told me no.
Okay.
And I was like, all right. And then we got back, and that was when I found out that she was still seeing her ex, Mike. Because she was in the shower, and he called. And I was like, I thought you said you hadn't talked to him in a year. He's like, are you back from Vegas? Yeah, I'm ready.
So when you showed up to the house, to Heather's house, and she said that she had a date, was the date already there, or was the date coming?
I don't know. I don't think the date was there. Because she stood at the door and talked to me for a couple of minutes. You know, she let me say the piece about the phone. It could have went either way, I don't know.
What do you mean it could have gone either way?
Well, he could have been there, or could not, or she could have been there, or she could have not.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. She could have been there.
Heather's bisexual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think that her date would have been there. And for her to have the door open and talk to me, but maybe. If her date was like in the shower or something, I don't know. or she's just real relaxed.
So she normally invites people over to her house and they just shower in her house?
Yeah, she's got a strange, I don't know what you call it.
Okay.
She called a guy, when we came back from the family reunion, she called a guy that she didn't even know. And he showed up and she disappeared with him for 2 days. And she missed a day of work, almost lost her job.
When was that?
It would have been sometime in September. That was right before I moved out. Because I was like, I just can't handle this no more. I gotta get my own place.
And so when you showed up to her house the night that she had the date, how did that make you feel?
Dejected, maybe.
Angry?
No,
Frustrated?
just disappointed, I guess. Yeah, I gave up being mad at her a long time ago because, like I said, it was no big deal for her to just say, hey, disappeared for 2-3 days. And I just...
So that's kind of emotional for me. Okay.
Oh, no, that's real emotional. I mean, yeah, I didn't want to live no more, you know?
Is that because you're jealous of the lifestyle that she has?
No, it's because she doesn't want me. Yeah, it's because I do everything I can to be a good mate. And we have this agreement, and then she'll just go off, she'll get too drunk, and she'll do stupid stuff and make poor decisions. And then disappear for a couple days, and then I always forgive her. And yeah, I just always, but then it destroys a little piece of me every time. It just makes me feel worse and worse and worse. And that's why I had to move out. Yeah, so that there'd be something left of me. And that still didn't work.
So who, besides Heather, I'm trying to understand this, besides Heather being at the house on the night that you showed up, okay, was there anybody else other than the date, or just the date and her? Was her kids there or anything like that?
No, her kids weren't there, because they definitely came out and said hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did she tell you, tell you where she was gonna go? Sometimes people,
No,
for safety reasons, say, hey, you know, we're gonna go out to dinner, or, you know.
She wouldn't do that stuff with me. She'd tell her kids. She'd tell her oldest son, Alex. She tells him everything.
Okay.
Yeah, she tells him everything. Yeah, no, she wouldn't tell me, anything like that. She just said she had a date and she didn't want to see me that night, so go ahead and leave.
How long were you at the door for?
It seemed like an extended amount of time for her being so brusque. I don't know, probably, 3 to 7 minutes maybe.
Yeah. So you're at her front door for 3 to 7 minutes, just talking on the front door. Did you guys actually go into the entryway inside of the house?
No, she kept me on the outside of the screen.
Okay.
And then she went back and got me the money she wanted.
Okay.
What it sounds like to me, Kevin, is you put a lot of effort into this relationship. I mean, you're going out of your way to, you're going to her house. You're putting in the effort. Isn't that be fair to say?
Well, I think
You care deeply for her.
Yeah, and she cares deeply for me. She's got just this thing. Me and her mom talked about it all the time. She's just got this thing where every once in a while she just has to go off and do her own thing. Her mom told me if I didn't care about her, that she'd probably stay with me. And I said, well, that makes no sense. Why would I want to do that? Because
You want somebody that cares for you.
yeah, ideally, even, if it's strange, I don't know. I told her I don't understand how she could say that she loves me when she does what she does. But I'm just wired different. If I love somebody, I can't go screw somebody else. No. But it didn't seem to make any difference to her.
Again, he kept presenting Heather as the person who controlled the relationship. She told him when he could stay or when he had to leave, and he just went along with it. He wasn't even mad, just disappointed with her poor choices. And based on what we know about Kevin, including his violence and his control over what Heather did with her time, the story he was telling did not add up. According to Kevin, he did go to see Heather on February 8th, the night that Scott died. He was at her house trying to get back with her. But also, he wanted to pawn his phone, which I guess was his explanation for why his phone was at Heather's house all night. Maybe he hoped that would be a good enough excuse. He also told the police that when Heather told him that she had a date with Scott that night, he was upset but was respectful and left. Which, I gotta say, that's not super believable to me. If you're like super obsessed with this woman, you keep wanting to get back together with her, so much so that you're like, take this crap job just so that you can be closer to her, then you show up at your house and you find out she's going on a date with somebody else, you just leave, cool, calm, and collected. I don't know how likely that is. But Kevin also said that they apparently connected after the date, because that's when he, according to him, moved back in with her. According to Kevin, they both were trying to make things work.
So, the 14th.
Okay. Did you guys do anything fun for the 14th for Valentine's Day?
No, because we had a disagreement on the 13th. I was trying to make it home from work soon enough to go to the grocery store and try and get my phone so I could call and get my meds set up. And then I was going to surprise her with the dinner and then breakfast in a car on the 14th. And we got into a fight.
What was the fight over?
It was over...
It's okay. I'm not going to judge you.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm sure it was something I did wrong, you know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know, I pissed her off somehow, but she didn't throw me out,
Okay.
so that was good. But it just like ruined everything.
Sure.
Yeah, I asked her to marry me. Yeah. Yeah, but I asked her to marry me. And she said, there's no way she can marry me.
Okay.
And so I just...
How did that make you feel?
Deflated. Yeah, just like a worthless pile of shit.
Oh, you're not.
Now, when it came to Heather's relationship with Scott, he flat out refused to hear about it. Not really cool, calm, and collected, okay with her dating, right? He acted like he didn't even know who Scott was, but also like Scott was the real villain in all of this.
The reason why we're here talking is because we have been looking at somebody's social media site, okay? And that person had contact with Heather last week, okay? And I'm sure that you've probably heard or seen stuff in the news about somebody disappearing from Greeley. Do you know anything about that?
Is it a musician?
Is it a musician? Yeah, he was a musician.
Yeah, Heather showed me that on her phone.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Did she tell you that she knew that person?
She said that she had seen him play, and she actually took the kids to see him play.
Okay. Her boys?
Yeah, her boys.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're like 23, so I can't really call them kids.
No, they're still kids because I'm 40, you're 48. This
Right.
guy's a lot older than both of us put together, so we're not kids anymore. I mean, we're grown men here,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, someplace downtown in Greeley's where he plays,
Okay.
and it's blues.
He does blues music?
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of a musician is he?
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I think the article said, it sounded like he's a pretty good musician.
Yeah, there's a lot of people know him. I mean, a very well-known musician.
Right on. Yeah, I think I remember reading that in an article.
Okay. And so I'm kind of looking at, Ryan and I are both kind of looking into that, and we're trying to figure out what happened. Okay, what happened to him? And Heather knows him on social media. And just in the course of doing a background investigation, Heather came up and we looked at her and you came up and that we know about your warrant. Okay?
Right.
And so we were wanting to come talk to you to find out about that a little bit more. Okay?
About the warrant?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what you know about Heather knowing this guy. Because we want to talk to Heather as well. And I think she's working, it's 11 o'clock, 11:20 right now. I think she's working till what, 2 or 3 today?
They close at 2 and then she leaves out at about 3:30.
Okay. And so we don't want to go and interrupt her work. Okay?
No.
And I think what happened was we were looking for you and Donnie just happened to come across you. And that's the reason why we're here today.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so do you know this guy's name, the musician that's missing? Because she showed you the news article, his name's in there.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that what position he plays is in there too, but I didn't really look at it that much.
How come?
I don't know, that's just an ugly thing.
What's ugly about it? He's missing.
What's that?
I said, what's ugly about it?
My mom died of cancer. That was about the most brutalest thing that anybody could go through. I just lost my aunt to cancer. Death is just, it's painful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did Heather say about it when she showed you the news article?
She found it on Facebook. I really don't remember. If I had to try and recreate the situation, it was something like, hey, I've watched this guy play. Or, yeah.
Did she tell you that she had seen him at all in the recent weeks? Outside of the bars?
Yeah, but I think that's something that she should probably share with you guys, because yeah, there was something that happened between them.
Okay.
And yeah, I remember.
Well, we're here talking to you, and this is a private room,
Right.
and the conversation that we're having right now is between the three of us.
Right.
Okay. And so it would help me, okay, when I go talk to Heather, if I kind of have an idea of what we need to go talk about.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
And you'd be doing me a huge favor if we could do that.
well, I remember she started crying.
When was this?
I think when she showed me the article,
Okay.
or the Facebook thing.
So that was around the 11th or the 12th when that article went out.
Okay. her day that she showed me that's one of the nights I stayed at her house. And,
All right. And so why was she crying? What was she upset about?
man, that's kind of for her to tell you guys. It's like it's real personal. I really felt sorry for her. But it didn't make sense because
I can feel that you're really conflicted over this.
well, I am.
It's
It's for her to tell you, but it probably really.
I think it would be easier for her to tell me if I knew already, and I could tell her that I already knew what happened, and that you told me. And then when I go talk to Heather, that it might help her open up about it, that I already know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the only reason I laugh just because it's hard to get Heather to open up about anything. I just had her.
Well, somebody that she cares about. You. Okay. Tells me what's going on. Okay. So what can she tell you? Or what can she tell me that you know about?
Well, that she knew this band member before he went to Tennessee to a blues jam. I think.
Okay.
And then I'm just trying to think exactly
Okay.
in the context that she showed me. Anyway, it came out that she had intimate relations with him,
Okay.
and that it wasn't like really. Oh man, I'm trying to think of the right words, but it wasn't mutually agreeable. That's kind of how she made it sound.
Okay.
And then I didn't believe that because she said she took the boys to go see him. And I said, well, why would, if somebody did that to me, I wouldn't ever want to go to wherever they were at again. You know what I mean? I just want to, you know what I mean?
Sure. So let me understand this, okay? So, I mean, that was, bam, that hit me right in the face.
Okay.
So, Heather hooked up with this guy named Scott. Does that sound familiar? Does Scott sound familiar?
I don't know if she ever mentioned, I'm sure, I don't know if she ever mentioned his name or not. I don't know.
But it was in the news report, in the Facebook article, right?
Yeah, I was on a phone. I didn't really read it that close. Smaller print.
Okay, so she goes and meets him at some bar in Greeley, and somehow they connect after that, after they meet,
Well,
and they're intimate with each other. Now, you say that they were intimate with each other, and that's different than what you told me 2 minutes ago about how it wasn't mutually agreeable. So did Heather tell you that the intimacy that they had was unwanted by one of the parties that was involved in it?
that was kind of just where she was headed to.
Okay.
But I didn't really buy it because of the factors that she went to see him after that. And it's like, well, then
When did she go to see him after that?
it was probably the 5th, because she said it was a week ago, and it was on a Wednesday.
Okay. Did she go see him play?
Yeah,
Okay.
and she took her kids. And that's where I said, you just,
Okay, so who didn't want to have sex in that encounter?
I really wish that I feel like I'm like betraying a trust if I tell you.
Well, it's easier that you and I talk about it for when I go and talk to her and I just say, hey, look, I heard that there was some sort of contact between you and this guy named Scott, and it was unwanted. And I leave it at that.
Yeah, he went over to her house. So I think that they've probably been seeing each other for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the question is who didn't want it? Was it her? Was it him?
Well, okay, she told me that she told him no, and he just kept going. And that he her. And I feel bad speaking ill of the dead, right? 'Cause that's not very polite. And I feel bad breaking her confidence. But like I said, I don't know how believable that is, because why would you go back and see him after that? I mean, I wouldn't do that. And would you?
That would be tough.
Yeah, she said just because she likes the blues, and I was like, I don't know.
And so she saw him again after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and even took the boys to go see him after that. But maybe that's why she took the boys, just so she'd feel safe.
So let me ask you this. How does that make you feel?
Because she takes her boys to make her feel safe.
No, that she's saying that this guy...
If he actually did, or just that she's saying it.
I think that's that. I mean, that's like splitting hairs. I mean, how does that make you feel? She says that this guy raped her.
Well, it just didn't
How does
add
that
up.
make you feel?
I don't think that he actually did. Because,
Why was that?
Well, why would she go see him again? You know what I mean? As far as how it makes me feel, rape's a bad thing. And I love her a lot.
Okay.
But she's done a lot of things to get herself hurt that, yeah, I've tried to get in the middle of, and it just backfires on me. So she's her own person, she makes her own decisions, but yeah, I guess it just hurts me that somebody would hurt her like that.
Okay. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here, and there's a lot of things that are kind of evolving and stuff like that, okay? And I'm curious about that date that she had that night that you went over there, okay? Everything that you say can be used against you in court, right? You understand that? You have the right to have an attorney present
Right.
during questioning. If you can't afford an attorney, the courts will appoint one to you. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Okay. And at any time that you, during this conversation, don't want to talk to us anymore, you just have to tell us that you don't want to talk to us. Okay? And then we'll end the conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and along with the lines with the attorney, you have the right to have that attorney present with during any questioning as well.
Okay.
You understand that?
Yeah.
Okay.
A year ago on Valentine's Day, the lady that I'd been with went through hell and back, treating each other bad and good, and Heather.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I still love her with all my heart. And we're trying to work it out. Yeah, I don't know, my sister's totally against me, but anyway.
So when the police asked Kevin why his phone said that he was in the same area where Scott's body was found, Kevin had the perfect excuse. He said that the two of them went up to breakfast at a restaurant that was up there. It was all a coincidence. But finally, the police asked Kevin where Heather was. He said that she was at work, but she wasn't. They had already checked. Her car was at the house, but Heather was still nowhere to be found. In fact, she hadn't been seen since that night when she and Kevin went to Troy's house. which was weird because according to Kevin, Troy and Heather didn't get along very well. Well, you'll remember that the police saw something burning when they went to that property. So now, when they went back to that burn pile, they found a table and a board that were still smoldering. And underneath all of that debris that was on fire, this makeshift bonfire, they saw Heather's dead body. And luckily, it was still mostly intact because for the second time, Kevin had tried and failed to actually destroy the evidence in this fire. Like Scott, Heather had been wrapped in plastic sheets, but she also had barbed wire around her, which seems like a personal dig, in my opinion. I mean, maybe he didn't have any duct tape this time, I don't know, and maybe that's why he used the barbed wire, but it's disgusting. Her cause of death was that she had been shot twice in the chest. Now, I'm sure that the officers felt awful about Heather because up until that time, they thought that maybe she and Kevin were working together. But now it was a lot clearer that Kevin was responsible for both of these murders. They just needed Kevin to confess.
You're telling me the last time you saw Heather was yesterday afternoon, and then you left her house by yourself. Is that right? Because that's what you just said a couple minutes ago.
Did you leave her house with her or without her?
I left without her to go get buried.
Okay. I'm going to show you a video of a camera that's facing her house from last night. It says February 15th, 2020 at 5:17 p.m. and 20 seconds. Okay? And it goes to 5:18 and 10 seconds. Okay? Now I want you to watch right up there. Oh, it's not playing. That's you and Heather walking out of the house. She's wearing a white coat. She's carrying some stuff and you're walking behind her.
We told you we have new developments.
She gets in the front seat of your car. You put something in the back seat. You get in the car. She doesn't get out. No, hold on a second. We're watching this real quick, okay?
Well, I was just gonna show you.
Hold on a second. No, we're watching this.
Okay.
Okay, that's your car. And you drive away. And you want to know what this tells us? What we know is that you drove away with Heather last night and she never returned to your house or to her house. And that we had a tracker on your car and we tracked you going out to the house out in Weld County, the farm where the barn is, where the burn pit is, that you were tending to this morning.
Right.
Okay? And we found Heather. And Heather is in the same condition that Scott is.
No way.
It's time to start talking.
This is the time that you need to talk. If you're not going to tell us the truth, then this conversation is over.
Well, Kevin never admitted to killing Scott or Heather. He denied that Heather was dead. He was accusing the police of trying to trick him. He also said he made some kind of promise, and that's why he couldn't talk about it before he ended up asking for his lawyer. But once the officer stepped out, he said a prayer for Heather's safety, which I gotta say is a true slap in the face coming from the person who murdered her. So Kevin was arrested and charged with both murders, and the police believed that Kevin killed Scott in a fit of jealousy. And it's possible that Scott never even knew that Kevin existed. The relationship was so new, and Heather might not have even opened up about him yet, which is so sad because Scott probably didn't even understand why Kevin hated him enough to attack him and then take his life. And Heather's story, sadly, was one that we've all heard too many times before. She tried to leave her abuser, and he killed her for it. The trial happened in July of 2022. Kevin was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of tampering with a body, and 2 counts of tampering with evidence, plus a domestic violence enhancer for Heather's death. And he looked really different from the man who was arrested. I honestly did not recognize him at first. He looked so different, but those buggy eyes of him just gave him away. The prosecutors laid out what they thought happened. The theory was that Kevin showed up at Heather's house on February 8th, expecting her to take him back. But Heather was seeing Scott, so she told him no. Presumably, Kevin then got his hands on Heather's phone somehow. Or maybe he was so obsessed with Heather that he had managed to hack into her accounts, I don't know. But either way, they believe that he was the one who invited Scott over that night. Because her messages, if you remember, to Scott from that night were way colder than any of their previous messages. So it's possible that Kevin was the one who sent them. And whoever sent the messages, it worked. Scott came over. And as soon as he walked into the house, Kevin attacked him and murdered him, most likely with a knife. He cut and slashed Scott's neck so badly that his head was barely attached, and his spinal cord was severed. That's how brutal this assault was. His blood soaked the complete entryway of Heather's home too. Then they believe that Kevin forced Heather to help him put Scott's body in the car, and she went with him to dump his body the following day. For the next few days, Kevin stayed close to Heather, watching her, making sure she didn't go to the police. And after years of being controlled and terrorized by him, she felt trapped. But it's likely that she was starting to crack, especially since Heather had a drinking problem, which we know of because she had a breathalyzer installed in her car. Which I have to imagine that Kevin didn't just kill Heather because that's the kind of abusive piece of trash that he was, but also because she was a witness to what he had done to Scott. So now she was a liability. It was only a matter of time before she talked. I don't know why Heather was unsteady in that final video. Maybe Kevin drugged her or got her so drunk so she would be easier to control. I'm not sure. But either way, Kevin brought her to Troy's house, which was where he shot her, wrapped her up, and then put the spent bullet cartridges in his pocket. Then he started the fire, and maybe he had learned his lesson with Scott that he needed more gas, so he left to make sure that he could fill up that canister and then make sure that she was all burned up completely. But instead, he was arrested before he could get back and burn the rest of the evidence. The prosecution had weapons, blood evidence, tracking information, cell phone records. The police had found a huge pool of blood in Heather's entryway. And when Kevin was arrested, he also had those 2 shells for that bullet that matched the ones that killed Scott. The gun was found on Troy's property where Kevin had been living. So, I mean, the evidence, it was a lot. But still, the defense argued that Heather had killed Scott and that Kevin helped her cover it up, all because he loved her so much. Apparently, Heather had cheated on Kevin in the past, and he didn't care then, so he also didn't care that she was dating Scott now. They also argued that that footage at the grocery store and on that road couldn't conclusively prove that it was Kevin. I mean, a good try, A for effort, but not convincing. And the jury thought so too, because they found Kevin guilty on all charges. And after 2 nightmarish years, Kevin was finally being held responsible for his crimes. He received the maximum sentence, 2 life sentences with no parole. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. And I'll just say it, Kevin sucks. He was an angry, aggressive man who wanted to have total control over the woman that he was obsessed with. And 2 innocent people paid the price for his demonic obsession. Now get this, Scott's father, Stan, ended up giving his beloved trumpet to Scott's biological sister, Allison, that one who felt immediately connected to him. She was the only blood relative that he had left, and she was honored to receive such a meaningful gift. As for Heather, her son Alex misses his mother tremendously, who you'll remember was also his best friend. So he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. Scott and Heather deserved better. They deserved to live long, happy lives with each other or with others. But Kevin took that from them both just because he didn't want her to be with anybody else. And that is where domestic disputes and when these toxic relationships, it gets so dangerous. Like the statistic says, it takes sometimes up to 7 tries to safely get away. And that doesn't even guarantee that somebody will safely get away. The fact that there are people out there who feel so entitled to own these people as property and that they cannot live without them, it is so disgusting and just so egregious in a different kind of way. Like the fact that people feel like they're entitled to that, to where if somebody wants to move on or not be with them because of how they are personally treating them, that they deserve to die for that. And poor Scott, he was just going over to the house smelling groovy, wanting to hang out, and little did he know he was walking into this like plotted, blitz-crazed attack by this barbarian. It's incredibly sad, and I think it's just another reminder, not that we necessarily need more reminders, but I think it is another reminder that if you feel like something's wrong or if you see something in a friend or a family member, say something. The more people that can safely get out of these situations, the better, because we discuss situations that end like this, unfortunately, far too often. Thank you for hearing Scott and Heather's story today. It is not an easy one, but it is a good reminder for all of us. All right, guys, I will be seeing you again very soon. Thanks for tuning in. Until the next one, please stay safe. Bye.